It's a clear 2008 evening, and you're going into the theater to watch Iron Man, wondering who this Robert Downey Jr. guy is and why Marvel couldn't cast an actual actor. Maybe it's the recession and they couldn't afford someone with some real talent. Whatever. You pay your ticket, sit down in your seat, watch a trailer about a panda who knows kung fu, and then it happens. Tony Stark's slick Humvee intro scene, the surprise attack on the caravan, meeting Yinsen in the cave, the creation of the Mark I suit, Yinsen's death, the shootout, and then Tony blasting off to freedom like a 4th of July firecracker. If you were anything like my teenage self watching all this happen, you probably remember sitting in that theater with your mouth open, witnessing this Super Saiyan MacGyver synthesize science and brute force into an iron death machine. It was crazy, it was cool, and according to Rotten Tomatoes, it was oh so fresh. Amidst all this shiny, ostensibly fresh material, we almost forget that Iron Man 1 is a downright old and predictable story, is a rehashing of an archetypal template we've seen 1,000 times before, known in literary parlance as the hero's journey. Maybe the term hero's journey is new to you, but you're definitely already familiar with its fundamentals. Because even before walking into Iron Man, you definitely knew that Tony would be put into some bad situation. And when he was, you knew that he'd survive. And when he survived, you knew that he'd undergo a change. You've seen it all before. Many of the most popular movies follow this formula. What I'm interested in is why this formula is so captivating that it could be recycled repeatedly and still possibly be engaging. This is a question that psychologists and literary critics have been interested in for over a century, one notable figure being Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell was a professor on comparative mythology who identified two different types of mythologies prevalent in every society. The first kind is the local story, which are designed to teach the customs and rules of the local society. These stories emerge from the left hemisphere of the brain, which is responsible for logical thinking. Local stories tend to be extremely practical. These stories can range anything from Aesop's fables, dispensing timeless moral lessons, to your mother telling you should be more like your cousin and become a doctor. Then comes the second type of myth, emerging from the right hemisphere of the brain, which is responsible for creativity. These stories always follow a model in which a central hero is thrown into a journey in which he undergoes transformation and saves his community when he returns. The fantastic battles and transformations portrayed in these stories are an expression of humanity's innate desire for transcendence, to ascend from the familiar to pursue the passions of their souls. The beginning of such narratives always feature a call to adventure, where the hero is tossed willingly or unwillingly out from comfort and into the unknown. Then there's the threshold, or the beginning of transformation, where the hero will meet a helper, usually supernatural but not always. Third, there's the abyss, a time of darkness in which the hero undergoes a symbolic death and rebirth, emerging from the trial a new man. No matter the time or the place, every great culture has featured such stories, whether it's the story of Abraham in the Pentateuch, or Achilles in the Iliad, Rama in the Ramayana, or Tony Stark in Iron Man. Yes, that too. But as timeless as this narrative is, there's never been a civilization in which the hero's journey has been so excessively produced and consumed as it has been in ours. Our generation seems affected by a profound hunger for these stories, because of how our modern hyper-urban context overfeeds us the local stories of comfort and safety. Get a degree, secure a salary, retire young. Who's heard that before? Because our innate hunger for transcendence is so disregarded in our schools and workplaces, we seek what we sorely lack in movies. Hence the elation we feel when witnessing Tony's development of the Mark II into that glorious first suit-up of his superheroic career. We vicariously live our own desires for transformation through Tony's ascension from man to God. Now, as essential as the hero's journey is in addressing our innate desires for transcendence, there are some who believe our generation's obsession with superheroes in general is problematic, such as legendary writer Alan Moore, author of The Watchmen. According to Moore, a significant section of the public, having given up on attempting to understand the reality they are actually living in, have instead reasoned that they might at least be able to comprehend the sprawling, meaningless, but at least still finite universes presented by DC or Marvel comics. What Moore means to say is that our obsession with superheroes is basic escapism. But is Moore right? Is Marvel just churning out escapist fantasies, sedating the masses into a fabricated fulfillment? I don't see it that way. You see, I don't believe that escapism is fundamentally a bad thing. Sure, some people get carried away, but there are some ways in which humans learn to deal with the problems of their own world by experiencing different worlds through a process called catharsis. Catharsis is the process of releasing emotional tensions through exploring art. Next time you see someone cheering or crying in a movie, you can be sure they're going through a cathartic experience. Catharsis is more than just an emotional release. It leads to the absolute moral transformation of the hidden vices of that same person into virtues. Consciously or subconsciously, audiences connect with heroes and add the hero's trials to their own experiences. Thus, once an audience leaves the MCU and returns to the real world, they leave slightly different people from when they entered, more experienced and able to face the trials of their own existence. Now granted, the differences between you and Tony Stark are, forgive me, stark, but I'd argue that your life only looks different to Tony's on a superficial level. Because yeah, Tony can shoot lasers from his palms, but at base, superheroes are just people. And their struggles, though of a more explosive scale, are always categorically the same as our own. For example, let's examine the ultimate showdown in Iron Man 1, where Tony is pitted against Obadiah Stane, the Ironmonger. With the creation of the Mark II, Tony's transformation is complete, emerging a renewed man with renewed abilities and renewed hope. We sometimes believe or want to believe that all stories end here, but in the hero's journey, the struggle of death and rebirth is followed by an even more dangerous battle called the atonement. The atonement is a moment where the hero must face an evil power that's asserted control over his life. Classically, this power is embodied in an evil father figure, which in this case is Obadiah Stane, late business partner to Tony's father and current manager of Stark Industries. It turns out that Obadiah's long been pulling the strings, using Tony's genius to inflate demand for weapons by selling to both sides of the conflict. If we can get past the mech suits and lasers for a second, you'll come to see that this conflict is almost universally relatable. It's the story of a man facing up to his past legacy, one that he's tried to reform but despite his best efforts comes back to haunt him. I'd venture to guess that many of you have already been through an abyss. You've been through a bad relationship, mental illness, career setbacks, but somehow emerged from that darkness with a new sense of self and hope. But then, after a few weeks, months, or even years of blissfully living your new life, that evil thing that you thought you left behind in the abyss came crawling back, intent in dragging you into that same pit from which you escaped. So though you've never battled a flying tank on legs, you have had old self-doubts resurface after losing your job. You have had relationships go wrong in the same way over and over again. Thus, despite all the things that make Tony different from us, he's essentially struggling with something we can all understand and identify with. Subconsciously, we see ourselves in his struggle against a complicated past. Which leads us to the final part of the hero's journey, the return. In this final stage, upon returning from his great battle, the hero brings back a prize that changes society for the better. In a Marvel movie, this prize could be the Avengers Initiative, the Stormbreaker, or the Infinity Gauntlet. But all versions of this prize are just symbols for the same thing: hope. And that's why Tony's eventual victory leads to an explosive moment of cathartic bliss for us normal people. Tony wins to bring back hope. Hope that no matter how many times we must battle our marred pasts, we will one day triumph over everything. Stories like Iron Man remind us that we're all heroes on a journey, who undergo transformations, battle fearsome archenemies, sometimes barely surviving, but nevertheless continue striving. And that's a story that we'll always need, one that never gets old. Friends, thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And a special shout out to all those who've stuck with me through my first year of creative self-discovery on YouTube. It's been a wild few months, and I appreciate every single one of you guys who have been with me every step of the way. And to all, grace, peace, and see you in the next one.